Ministry of Labour, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, in conjunction with the International Labour Organization, is hosting a two-day workshop on variation in fishing sector and ILO Convention No. 190 in Walvis Bay and Luderitz from the 3rd to 4th of August and from the 10th to the 11th of August respectively. The aim of the workshop sought to raise awareness about the recently published Government Gazette on variation in fishing sector as well as the ILO Convention 190 that deals with the elimination of violence and harassment in the workplace. Now, for insight on this, I'm joined by the Director of Labour Services in the Ministry of Labour, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, Ms. Aune Mudjanima. Ma'am, good evening and welcome to the Daily Roundup.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
Ms. Mudjanima, what are the expected outcomes for these two respective workshops that will be hosted?
The outcome is really for the sector to fully implement the variations that they themselves as employers and employees have discussed and agreed on and approached the government to approve and gazette. So what we are expecting after these workshops, being the fact that we have now discussed and digested each aspect of the variation, it's for them really to implement it in totality, at the same time also make sure that they comply with the provisions of the law.
Mm-hmm. What specific provisions of the Labour Act have been varied?
Though I want to make it very clear that though they have requested for the variations in terms of Chapter 3, based on some specific sections, they will still be able to implement in conjunction with the whole labour law in totality. So the specific provisions that they have requested to vary is mostly it's specific section 60 of Chapter 3, which is speaking of the ordinary hours of work, where they would want to adjust to vary from the hours that are provided for by the Labour Act. We all know that the fishers' environment, working environment is very peculiar, and therefore, to make it easy for them to comply, they would want it. They requested to vary Section 16. The other section that they have requested to vary is 1617 of Chapter 3 of the Labour Act, which is basic condition of employment, which is of overtime, of which they also requested to vary so that they can be in a position to comply as a result of their operation. Another section that they have requested to vary is Section 18, which speak of meal intervals. We all know the situation and environment that the fisher operate. So they wanted to vary from the section that, from the provision that has provided for that. If an employer works for 5 hours at least, then for 8 hours, then they should not work over 5 hours without having an hour of meal intervals. For them, they have varied where they have then requested for lesser time periods in considerations of their operation. And lastly, they also requested to vary from the sections 20 of Chapter 3 of the Labour Act, where they have requested to vary from the daily spread over and weekly rest period. And those are the sections really that has been approved and gazetted for implementation.
Ms. Mudjanima, how will the Ministry of Labour ensure compliance on this variation in conjunction with other provisions of the Labour Act?
One of them is this exercise that we are carrying out now in Walvis Bay, We are here today and tomorrow to really workshop the whole variation as well as the convention that we have ratified, Convention 190, which is the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. We foresee as government that when you speak and educate the sector in the variation, it's better to altogether at the same time to also sensitize them on the critical need to make sure that we make our work environment safe. So it's one of them. Next week we will be in Luderitz, as also a coastal area where the fishing activities are happening. That's one of them, education, so that we foster knowledge for them to be able to understand and be in a position to fully implement. Second is to make sure that the labor inspectors, the other players within the sector fully comply, and the labor inspectors ensure that enforcement is done through either routine inspections, investigatory inspections, and many other issues that we have to carry out to make sure as per our powers provided for by the Labor Act. Those are some of the activity, and really to make sure that we educate and sensitize our people.
And how long will the variation be in force?
The variation, it's approved and gazetted to be effective for 5 years, and which came effective this year in March 2023, and therefore then it will run until 2028. So this is the second variation in the sector. The first variation was first approved in 2016, that had run until 2021. So during 2022, the players, which is the employer and the employee, were busy negotiating and consulting on the new variations and applications to the Labor Minister for approval and gazetting. So the implementation period of this current variation as a second variation in the land will run until 2028.
Just very lastly, Ms. Mudjanima, is there any other relevant information you'd wish to share on the planned activities?
The really planned activity is in fact a continuous of our effort to make sure that we consult, because when you speak of the labor relations and the labor fraternity, I always say it is difficult to play alone or as solo, because we need each other as a tripartite, government, employer, employee, so that we can engage and deliberate on issues that are moving forward, making sure that we bring about decent work in the fishing sector, because Namibia has also ratified Convention 188, working in fishing, and we are required to comply and report as a country, and to do that we need to make sure that we sensitize further, and we also comply to be able to report accordingly, and at the same time make sure that we integrate the national laws and the international laws that are applicable to the labor fraternity. I think with that, really, those activities, it's making sure that we enforce, making sure that we educate, and we discuss issues that are pertaining to eliminate also more complaints in the labor sector, and making sure that we assist our people, Namibian employees and Namibian workers, as expected of us.
Madam Aune Mudjanima, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a brief break.